Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm Genevieve Melford with the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program. We focus on the financial security and well-being of U.S. households. And what we know is that wealth is an absolutely critical ingredient to financial security and well-being for all families. So we think of wealth as not just for the wealthy, but it is actually a foundation of security and well-being for all families because it provides stability, it provides protection, it provides the means to invest in your family's well-being, which I know is one of the topics we're going to talk about today. And it provides the ability to participate fully in the economy, in society, and even in our democracy. So it's such an important topic. We're thrilled to be here. And because not everyone in America has the wealth they need to have all those functions, we're also thrilled to be partnering with Edward Jones, not only here at the festival, but throughout the year in our programming to build and strengthen pathways for wealth building for all families and all workers. So thrilled to be here, thrilled to welcome you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for this panel, Megan Leonhardt, who is this senior writer for Barron's, who specializes in economics and consumer finance. So take it away, Megan.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Well, thank you all for showing up and sitting here through our really exciting conversation today. It's interesting when I was asked to do this moderation. The topic, of course, is the Great Wealth Transfer, and it brought to mind, I'm dating myself a little bit, the scene from Gilmore Girls, if anyone's a Gilmore Girls fan. And, it was interesting because Richard and Emily were talking about their estate plan, and they gave Rory and Lorelai these little stickers to go stick on pieces of furniture and antiques throughout their house, and basically, you get this when you die. I'm not totally sure that that's the best way to approach these kind of conversations, but it was interesting because it was something in mainstream that was talking about these important conversations that families need to be having. And it's not just wealthy families, it's all families. It's interesting, Edward Jones actually did a survey recently, and 48% of Americans do plan to leave some kind of inheritance, and yet less than 3 in 10 have had any conversation about it. So I'm really excited to introduce our panelists today. Lena Haas is the Managing Director of Wealth Management at Edward Jones. And then we also have Joseph Coughlin, who is the MIT Age Lab genius. And so we're going to have a really fun conversation.
There are a lot of people who may argue with that, but okay.
hey, I think this is a genius panel. We're going to go with this. But I guess maybe it's helpful to kind of level set. So I know, Lena, I mentioned that this is something that all families should be really concerned about. But when you're thinking about the definition of wealth transfer, what does that kind of encompass? What's the sort of thing that you think is the most important aspect of this?
Yeah, Magna, thank you, and great to be here with all of you. So you talked about it. Almost half of Americans think that they're going to leave or receive inheritance in the next 10 years. And between now and 2045, almost 85 trillion, with a T, is going to be passed down from baby boomers and the silent generation to the younger generations. And so we've partnered with Next 360 partners to say, well, how do both givers and receivers feel about the wealth transfer, and what are the plans that they've set in place? And to your exact question, what we heard is that when Americans define wealth, it's not just the stickers from the Gilmore Girls. It's not just the dollars and cents. It's much richer than that. It's what are our values as a family? What is family legacy for us? What do good financial behaviors mean? And so you can see how it's so critical that family members are aligned on those really important priorities. It could make all the difference between a legacy that's family harmony and love and care versus just sort of confusion and hurt. And to that end, it's even more astounding that these conversations are not happening. It's not just that only a quarter of the research participants have had the conversation, it's that more than a third don't even plan on having them, ever. And that was one of the more surprising findings from the research.
Now, it's interesting because when we talk about the Great Wealth Transfer, we're really sort of narrowing it a bit to sort of baby boomers transferring their wealth to millennials. Yay. But, Joe, it's interesting. We've sort of seen with, this relationship, the strong relationship that millennials have with their parents, a lot of times parents have already done a lot for their children. Now, I would like to point out my parents are wonderful, but they didn't give me a down payment on a house, so I'm still waiting for that. But, how does that kind of change the calculus when we're talking about this wealth transfer if, the parents have been actually kind of helping financially along the way?
I think, first off, thank you, Edward Jones and Aspen, for having me here and having this conversation. I think a lot of people believe that the great wealth transfer is something that's there's going to be a clock, there's going to be a buzz, and we're off to the races. In fact, the great wealth transfer is already happening. It's now. As my daughter can attest, her wedding was expensive, part of the transfer. College education was expensive, part of the transfer. So it's already happening overall. But I think to Lena's point, the big challenge is most of us, I would argue, and the survey data seem to pan this out, have not had a complete conversation about the, shall we say, the rules of engagement and what that wealth is. And I don't just mean the tangible, the house, the money, if there are equities, but the values. And yeah, the stickers of the Gilmore Girls, you get the lamp, your sister gets the desk, whatever it might be. None of us have had that conversation. And in fact, the best way I think that Lena and I found, and the Edward Jones research team, we found at Next 360 was a lot of us are avoiding the conversation because remember, the great wealth transfer is not just about wealth. What is it about? Class participation is 10% today. It's about your death. So a lot of them don't want to bring it up because, gee, it's going to make mom, dad feel badly. On the other hand, they don't want to bring it up because it's not something that's kind of fun to talk about. So they avoid it. Some assume it. It's like, well, of course you're going to get it. Well, no one knows. And then there are very few of us that show we have actually addressed. We actually spoke to one person that said, it's all in the binder, it's all in the binder, it's all listed down and the like. So there's a lot of complexity going on, but not a lot of conversation.
So you both have mentioned the importance of having these conversations, but I think what's really sometimes lacking is how to start these conversations. How do you approach these really quite emotional sometimes topics, especially if you're really trying to do it in advance and really prep? I mean, Lena, kick us off here. In your mind, how do these conversations start? What's the good sort of game point, if you will, for families to kind of coalesce around?
Well, what you don't do is surprise your family at a Thanksgiving dinner table, saying, let's talk about this topic. Well, Joe, you said how emotional this can be and complex and talking about death. So what we saw is that close to 60% of Americans say we need help. And engaging a financial advisor, a financial professional can really, really aid in the conversation in terms of bringing the right parties to the table, setting the agenda to make sure that the right topics are covered. We oftentimes see that sort of the obvious topics of, your assets, perhaps retirement, perhaps investing are covered, but oftentimes families don't talk about important topics such as, what about I'm a business owner, I spent all my life creating this business, what should happen to this business? Surprisingly not talked about, or what matters to us in charitable giving, etc. So setting the agenda. Professionals can play the role of a coordinator. So if you need to bring in a financial professional, so estate planning attorney, a tax accountant, they can bring those parties to the table, coordinate, take the responsibility, take it off of you. Thirdly, that conversation around wealth transfer is not a one-and-done conversation. It's so important that, life changes. This is part of an overall financial plan that a financial advisor can create for your family to make sure that there is a true understanding of what are the goals, what are the fears, what are the dreams, how can you and your family live your best life, and then have this regular conversation. And then finally, be somebody who executes the plan so that when an event does happen, you and your family can be there for each other an advisor got you in terms of the logistics and executing on the plan. And so those are key things to keep in mind when prioritizing the conversation.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I think one of the things to think about is the advisor could actually act as a catalyst to have that conversation if you need someone to bring it up. But there are other trigger events that people should think about. The death of a loved one, particularly a grandparent, heaven forbid a death of a parent. There should also be, is there a health change? Has someone been diagnosed with something that really kind of brings that specter to life? And a lot of people try to keep this profoundly rational. Give it up. It's not rational. Emotion sets money in motion. Yeah. You need to have the conversation. And before there's that transfer, there must be the talk. And to Lena's point, it's not going to be just a talk. It's going to be a continuing conversation because things change, relationships change. And so you need someone to help guide it, but you also need to, shall we say, be patient on how that conversation's had. You're talking about an existential end, not just an economic decision.
Do you think that kids can bring up this conversation? Can they start it? Or is this just always going to come across like, hey, I'm a spoiled brat. What are you leaving me? I mean, is there ever a good time for, a child to say to a parent, hey, what's happening?
Looking a little pale today. Let's talk about the will. It's got to be choreographed. It should not be, and I think Lena made a good point. You don't want to have a conversation over Thanksgiving dinner, in part because wrong time, but the other thing is that if you have more than one sibling, or you don't want it to be a gang-up event. You want it to just be a choreographed event where it's a discussion about, what do you want? What are your values? Here, as an adult child, are my concerns. Get the ground set as to what the values are and what the concerns might be and what the parents may want. And then, shall we say, start talking about the mechanics.
Yeah, and on the topic of kids, right, oftentimes kids assume that inheritance is going to be, equal across, two brothers, a brother and a sister. But so here's the question. What if one child is incredibly successful and another child is struggling? Do you help the child that is struggling more? Do you reward the one who is successful and work really hard? Well, it's a personal decision. The key thing is if you don't have the conversation, kids don't know your logic. They don't know the reason why. It could upset the family dynamic and really create hurt forever. Right. But if you share the why, if you talk it through as a family, it makes all the difference.
Yeah, and it's not even. We actually interviewed people where some were just very mathematical, and it's just like, I've got 3 kids, divide by 3, we're done. Others, hey, one kid became an investment banker, the other one became a social worker. Right. How do I balance this out overall?
Joe, you mentioned something really interesting, that health instances can be a trigger for this. But when we're looking at the idea of longevity and we have our parents and even our grandparents living a lot longer than they did, how do those issues and health issues and long-term care play into this idea of wealth transfer?
It used to be pretty simple. We all died relatively early, so caregiving was a short order and it was relatively cheap. It is now possible, and there are many of them out there, that you could be retired and still taking care of your parents. Mm-hmm. My wife has someone in her office who has a grandmother that's over age 100. Her mother's in her 80s, and she's taking her own job and 2 kids. We're no longer talking about a sandwich generation. That's old news. We now have a panini. This is getting really tight. But the health issue, every fall, if you watch the financial news, every fall, there's at least 1 or 2 companies that issue very scary numbers about the cost of health care. Not just long-term care, but chronic conditions and the like. So what we're finding is that longer life is going to, shall we say, it sounds more pejorative than I mean it to be, drain down what people think those assets are going to be. So as we said, the great wealth transfer is already happening, and as we live longer, we're going to need more of that time. We're going to need some of it for health, but not to leave you on a dour moment. The baby boomers, well, if you want, how many of you, class participation, how many of you are baby boomers? Raise your hand. All right, put them down. We're only going to show this to our friends. Do you genuinely believe that our generation is nearly as nice, polite, and as patient as the previous generation? I don't think so. We want quality of life. So it's not just about health. I want to live a little bit. And then, kid, what's left over, you can have that too. So part of that great wealth transfer is going to be, shall we say, a negotiation. Let's put it that way.
Well, and to your point that I want to live the life and it's already started,
Yeah.
we see that it's not the traditional wealth transfer of I plan to leave most of the what I have to my kids, that's it. A lot of it is now giving while living, meaning that I want to travel with my family. I want to experience life. I want to have the joy out of life and in the process start the wealth transfer. That's one. And two is we see that more than a third are planning to leave wealth not to just the kids, but to grandkids, and sometimes skip a generation because, maybe my kids are all set, but I want to make sure that my grandkids can, go to college or get the good financial foundation.
Let me give you a data point. If you can't sleep, I write for Forbes sometimes. I got a piece that's coming out that, believe it or not, 54% of grandparents and older baby boomers plan multi-generational trips, organize and plan. But ready for this? 50% pay for the whole shot. So it's not just a matter of planning, we want to do this together. They're writing the check. And one of the other things that came up in some research I was doing for the article, it's bad enough that your kids want to go and your grandkids want to go. But guess what? Nieces and nephews think this is a good idea. They're coming along as well. So that great wealth transfer, it's starting to go on travel.
Hey, if someone's going to pay for an all-expenses-paid vacation for me, sign me up, please. When we're talking about these kind of issues, are there tools or sort of helpful guides, things that families, can really kind of utilize to make this process a little bit easier? I know, Lena, you mentioned the sort of binder, I think, or maybe it was Joe, mentioned a binder that one of the clients had. But I'm curious, beyond that, are there, sort of helpful tricks, if you will?
Yeah, what you're talking about, we were talking before the session, I mentioned how my financial advisor, when I started working with them, he gave me an actual file cabinet with plastic file little cabinet with actual folders and said, here's your retirement savings, here's your investing, here's your estate plan, empty, here's your power of attorney, medical power of attorney, empty, and he said that, okay, out of 10 folders, you only have stuff in 3. Let's work on filling the other 7. It's very visceral, right? And I'll give you another example. I mentioned before how wealth transfer is an important talk, but the talk is part of a much broader, ongoing financial planning conversation. So we, for instance, have a little tool that we use called Values Prioritizer. So multiple members of the family, for instance, 2 spouses, separately take a little online quiz. It lasts, 5 minutes. Very practical questions. Like if you have, $5,000 bonus suddenly, what are you doing? Are you paying off your mortgage early? Are you going on vacation? Are you saving it? Okay. And then when the spouses come into the financial advisor's office, they say, let's compare and contrast your answers, because really those answers are your values, right? So there are a lot of conversation starters to really get into the financial planning, like what matters most to you, and also to make the wealth transfer conversation much more, as I said in the beginning, than dollars and cents. It's the legacy of the family.
I think one of the things that we forget about is that a lot of people at a lower income bracket don't believe they have anything to transfer. They need some assistance to understand that, well, guess what? The house is an asset. Your insurance is an asset. That small savings account may be small, but that's an asset, as well as the retirement heritage or financial heritage you're passing on. And so trying to find a third party, whether it's an advisor or someone else to help moderate that discussion is good, because not only do they start the conversation, you really don't want to have a classic situation where, let's say you have 2 or 3 children. Generally speaking, one of the siblings always comes off as the heavy. They're the ones who enter the room, we're taking charge, we're going to get this done. They're the same one who want to talk to you about it's time for you to give up the keys. They're the ones that, they've made the decision, pass the peas, hand over the keys at Thanksgiving. Having someone in there moderate the conversation, be a coach, organize what needs to be done, and then eventually, if you need other expertise, be able to go out and find that expertise and put it together, to take that emotion and put it to good use.
We've talked a little bit about all the things that, don't necessarily get talked about in these conversations, but what does a successful conversation look like? What are the takeaways that, really do need to happen? I know when we have these kind of conversations, everyone can take away what they want to hear, but how do you ensure that folks are really actually listening and understanding the wishes of, the folks that are at play here?
Yeah, so that's such a good question, and I'll bring you back to, we did some research to understand what fundamentally really matters to people, and this is universal across all ages. One is purpose. Why are you here? Why is it that who you are and what you do matters? What is your impact to the world? Two is, how are you spending time with your family, with your friends, with those you love and bring you joy? Three is personal health and wellness, and that's both physical and mental well-being and emotional, right, very important. And fourth, financial. And so what I would say is that when it comes to the wealth transfer conversation, don't jump just to the financial and say, do I have the exact binder for my assets? Do I have the right tax management plan in place? Do I have the right system of trust? All those are very, very important. But what's most important is that it's that holistic plan that's covered.
And also, and this is coming perhaps from the adult-child perspective, but I would also ask what, why, and how. And I guess the what is it that you want? This gets to Lena's point about the values. What is important to you? Why are you doing the will or the trust or whatever it is in the way that you want? How is that making sense? And by the way, how do you actually want it to be done and for you overall? And so part of it is just trying to understand what their values are, what the transfer is going to be, and how it's going to be done, largely because the research also indicated that one of the biggest sources of stress for both sides, but particularly adult children, was not knowing what was needed, how it was supposed to be done, and are they doing it in the spirit of what their parents or grandparents wanted. So getting that out there relieves a lot of stress today, and as you pointed out well, Lena, is that it's something that is going to last well beyond the person that you're speaking with.
I like that. I know we're talking a lot about the whole family conversation here, but I'm curious for both of you, how important is it to maybe have pre-conversations? So, the idea that you're, having conversations between husband and wife or, different partners and of course, maybe having, initial conversations with children and whatnot, but it sounds like there's a little bit of work that needs to go on before you actually bring everyone together as well.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, so I have 2 teenage boys, and we had quite a number of conversations. They are not necessarily like, let's sit down and have a family meeting and talk about wealth transfer. Not like that, but a lot of smaller ongoing conversations about how do you save? How do you spend? What is responsible financial behavior? And then we had a couple with our financial advisor. And I think it's so good to have that conversation early on and to have it regularly. I'll also tell you, bless you, one little anecdote is that one of the topics that is often not at all covered in the discussion, and yet there's a misalignment between givers and receivers, is what are you going to spend the inheritance on? We see that older generations oftentimes assume that the inheritance is spent on your vegetables, meaning we pay off debt, maybe we put a down payment on the house, and maybe we save some. And the younger generations, they say, well, maybe we pay off debt, but also we want to go on a really exciting vacation. And also younger generations want to contribute to charitable causes at almost twice the rate. So 40% compared to 20%. Really interesting. And again, reinforces the idea that the conversation doesn't have to be like one heavy talk, but having lots of talks about what matters is important.
I want to segue off what Lena had to say there, because we're largely having this context about being between the generations, but let's raise this even further up, here at Aspen, is that we're about to see a major wealth transfer that is going to be often a transfer in values, that they're likely to want to invest in charities and the like. This transition could be a transformational moment of how wealth is used and its purpose across society and not just between generations. I recently wrote a paper. I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to give you kind of a visual way of thinking about the conversations. And the paper I wrote was called Up, Down, and Across. I want you to think about conversations need to be up from adult children talking to their parents. Down, issues that the parents want to talk to their children about, such as not just where the wealth is going, but how do I wish to be taken care of? What are my needs? And across, that's not just between the couple themselves, but also between the siblings. There needs to be some sort of consensus up, down, and across for the entire family on great wealth transfer, but any major decision.
And
like
by the way, I was just going to say that, by the way, that, there is sort of a big myth out there that, it's just impossible to talk to kids about this. They're always in their devices. They get their financial advice from TikTok and influencers. Well, we did a study that really, as a parent, warmed my heart. What we discovered is that, kids are on their devices. They are consuming information from multiple sources, certainly including digital sources. But when it comes to life advice and when it comes to financial advice, number one source they value and trust is parents. And number two, most of them are looking for in-person, face-to-face, real conversations with folks they trust. So beyond parents, financial advisors, respected friends and family members.
And by the way, not just parents. According to Pew, who's the most trusted parent for almost any issue? It's not me. It's mom. So not only is she Dr. Mom, she's mom CFO.
Moms wear a lot of hats. Before we open it up to questions from the audience, so guys, start getting your questions ready. They're done with my questions, but one more, if you will permit me. I always like to ask, I've seen a couple of folks taking notes and on paper on their phone and things like that, and so I'm curious, what are the big takeaways that you would like folks to know when we're talking about this great wealth transfer, when we're talking about these important conversations? What's the key thing that you think is most important that everyone here in the room and watching should, sort of keep top of mind?
You know what? I was going to give you top 3. I will actually do top 1. This conversation is never urgent until it is. So start it now. Don't procrastinate.
I was going to say, before there's the transfer, there must be the talk. Realize that it's more than about wealth, it's about values. And also realize that this is a family decision. It's not just one decision overall.
Lena, I'm going to ask you for the other two. I'm totally curious.
Well, I was going to say, engage your kids. It's never too late. And conversation not one and done. Prepare to have it at least as part of your annual fulsome conversation.
I like that. Okay, let's open it up to the room. We'll start right here. Wait for the microphone. It's coming, I promise. Just so everyone can hear you.
So much. Hi, how are you? Thank you guys so much. This has been great. I have 4 children, and they're in varying ages and varying stages in their lives. They range from 22 to almost 40. And we have struggled with the idea of how much information do we actually give them in a desire not to sort of kill any motivation to create their own lives and to move forward. And so, do you suggest that you actually talk to the kids about, I get the morals and the values, and we're totally on board with that, but also about how much they might expect or what the situation looks like, and in addition to the fact that we're living and giving as well?
Yeah, so this conversation this question actually comes a lot, especially when it relates to financial advisors with higher net worth practices. And what I've heard from advisors is there are very, very productive ways to have this conversation without focusing on the amount, right? So that doesn't mean you're not transparent about things beyond values. You could be very transparent as, at what age you get something, how does it sequence across ages, what do you get versus your other siblings, how do we think about, what to spend the inheritance on, can we align and talk about that? But it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact amount, is what I oftentimes hear from our advisors.
And I think one of the things that we found in the research as well was a real concern amongst adult children of any age, even in 40. In fact, one of the people that I interviewed was 40 years old, was the uncertainty drove them crazy, which is, even if you don't, as Lena said, give the amount, that either you're going to have the conversation or that there's a plan in place. So I'll give an example. One person was really upset or nervous about the grandparents are going to pay for his kid's college education. Okay, does that offset what I was going to get individually? That's great. Just let me know so I can plan as well, because by age 40, they're starting to enter the plan where they should be really planning as well. So reducing uncertainty for everyone is important.
Actually, that's a great question, because it does bring up the idea. There's been some research around the sort of surprise inheritances and finances that can play out, quite poorly for folks as well. And it does feel like, maybe you don't have to be totally transparent, but giving some indication that you may need to, get a financial advisor of your own, or, go do these things to prepare.
That you're thinking about it and that you're putting things in place.
Right, and also knowing about the fundamentals, right? Maybe it's not about, I need to know the exact number, but how will it affect my motivation? But, for a child that, your education will be paid for, you're okay, right?
Definitely. All right, I think I saw a hand over here, and I promise we're going to get around the room. There's a mic right next to you, sir.
Thank you. What do you do when you've had the conversation with your children, when they know what your estate is, and they realize that your estate is much larger than any of them can handle, and you know that you need outside advice, and you interview the different advisors, and they all sound the same? How do you know which one to choose? And should you expect to start paying for that service while you're still alive, productive, and able to manage your estate? Or do you have the stipulation in your wills that that everything kicks in, so to speak, after both of you have passed away? Tough question, but maybe you can share your experience.
I'll share maybe my perspective. Lots of firms, lots of advisors have similar services, have similar products. That's true. The question is, who is really going to be on your side? Who is really going to understand what you need, what your kids need? Who is going to listen and figure out, even in tough situations, when to do what's right and how to make your family happy? I think it's that trust and gut feel in the real partnership versus a service is maybe how I would approach selecting the right advisor for you.
But how do you know that person, first of all, is going to be there in 10 years, and second of all, understands the individual needs of your children, because they may be different?
Through in-depth interview conversations. I mean, I wish I had some, 10-minute talk with an advisor recipe. I don't. These are really serious life decisions. And having in-depth conversations, maybe visits with a financial advisor and their team to really explore not just, again, the offerings, but the real chemistry, and will they listen to your kids, and maybe meeting with kids. That's how you get a feeling.
The fees and the last word is, the fees for a large estate tend to be expensive. Should you expect to start paying for those fees now, or wait until you both pass away? One passes away.
Yeah. So I don't want to talk about the specific fees. It varies from individual situations. But one thing we talk about is that if there is a financial advisor, how can you make sure that there is that relationship across the generations, so maybe 2-3 generations, use the same financial advisor, and that's when it becomes not just sort of a fee for an estate, but a fee for ongoing help and planning and money management, et cetera.
It almost sounds like it might be easier to pick a therapist than a financial advisor. Very similar, right? I mean,
sometimes advisors have more
they are
trusted
absolutely
relationships
therapists.
than therapists
It's
with their
totally
clients.
true. It's totally true. All right, we'll go to this side of the room, sir.
Hey, thanks. I'm going to follow up on. Oh, thank you. Follow up on the two great questions that have already been asked, but. We live in a time where trust is not, not a great currency, and looking back in history, there are a lot of multi-generational wealthy families that have gotten captured by their advisors, and fee structures, and kind of trustee control, and those issues, if you dig into it, are not unknown in the history of of this sector. So, what's the advice today on how tightly to bind the next generation, how to sort of structure independence, but particularly in light of the comment just now, you realize some, but not all, or none of the next generation will be sort of physically trained and ready, mentally, physically, everything, all that thing. But what is the, what's the right amount of flexibility and, kind of thoughtful control to try to exert?
I'll give the classic academic answer, which I think is the best one. It depends. And what I mean by that, it really depends on the family dynamics as much as it is anything else. Not just the relationship with the advisor, but it depends on the family dynamics. What sense of agency and capability do your children have, do you have overall, to be able to be a partner with that advisor and not just beholden to whatever that advice may be? It should be, advice should be looked at as a partnership of agent and judge of the information. It is not, shall we say, a singular relationship overall. The last thing I would say is that one of the things that I think that we as parents have to be concerned about, and again, it depends, is what is called in financial services the dead hand from the grave, which is structuring it so much that you're not allowing enough flexibility for changes in that person or children's lives overall.
And some of these conversations, again, they might be challenging conversations, but all the research shows that it's usually much better to have the transparency up front. And even if it's tough, have the scenario planning go on, have the conversation moderated by a professional, not when it's an emotional moment, not when it's stressful as it is. And that can actually, surprisingly, bring families together.
My team at MIT has been doing a lot of research for nearly 20 years now on the future of advice, not just finance, but outside. And this goes to the question you were asking earlier on, essentially, who do you trust, who do you hire? The number one thing that we have found from surveys across all income brackets, age, gender, whatever cut you want to use, was not, can they do the money? Can they manage it? Will they make me money? Will they help me save money? That was the reason why they were in the room. That was the base cost of why your admission to even have me as a client. The biggest thing you have to assess is, do you get me? Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, that's the litmus test. Because, the algorithms can do the easy stuff. It's the, do you get me?
I like that. All right, I'm going to go in the back of the room because I haven't done that quite yet. The lady in the blue with the microphone right next to her.
Hi, I'm in Detroit, and we did some research where we found over 5,000 heirs properties in our city, worth collectively over $270 million and impacting largely Black middle-class households. You hit on this a little bit in terms of helping low and moderate income households understand that they do have things of value to pass on, but a lot of times they might be not engaged with traditional financial institutions or have access to affordable legal resources, or even be seen by financial advisors as kind of prime clientele. Can you talk a little bit more about how we can work within low and moderate income communities to protect that?
Great question. I think that one of the things we're forgetting about is that the nature, let me start for a minute. Retirement, let alone great wealth transfer, is a myth that was created over the last, we'll give it 100 years, but even less, last 100 years. most people are not part of what I call that retirement heritage. You know, we have no idea where those two people walking down the beach came from and where they're going, but they're on every retirement brochure there is out there. Think about the fact it's not just low-income minority communities of color, but there's a lot of people who are foreign-born that are coming to this country and don't have that trust issue in certain institutions, have no idea about where retirement is. And think about the number of people, and I'm one of them, first-generation college, and if I choose to retire, will be first generation to retire. Where's the mental model that I have? So to answer your question, I think that we're talking about formal education. I think advice that is affordable, and I'm not sure how to do that, not yet at least, to make that affordable, but also all the institutions that used to be part of those communities, whether they're faith-based or community organizing and the like, to provide insight into you do have wealth. It may not be a lot, but how do you manage it? And these are the tracks that you can use. And by the way, one last thing, and I'll be quiet. One of the things that was striking in the research that Lena and I and the Edward Jones team did was the number of people who did have wealth that were high income who did not believe they had anything to transfer. We started talking to them about the great wealth transfer. That apparently is a really good conversation for a seminar topic, but for most people, it's like, literally, I had one woman look at me and go, yeah, I don't know about that. And she was about $200K a year. So, yeah, we have a real dearth of information.
And can I just say, you hit on something that I'm really, really passionate about, which is I think that it's our responsibility as an industry, as population that has the resources to instill financial literacy, starting with an early age, across everyone in the society, and especially among those who wouldn't get that help otherwise. So financial literacy in the classrooms, across every community, including, certainly to your question, underprivileged communities. Education online, instilling confidence and readiness at an early age, that's what prepares you for much more material decisions later in life.
And I'd even push that further to say financial literacy is a mere element of longevity literacy. All of us are going to be living longer, even those who are not in great shape. Where are you going to live? How are you going to get around? What are you going to do? How are you going to pay for it? How will you manage your health? Believe it or not, we're now living closer and closer to 100 years. There is no education out there for anyone of any income or education bracket to how to navigate that longer life. Finance, I believe, will be the vehicle to have that conversation that'll start with money and be broader to a larger discussion of longevity preparedness.
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like we need almost like pre-retirement classes for folks these days, right?
Well, have you ever thought, and I think you and I chatted about this earlier, and Lena I know did earlier this morning, think about this. Every other life stage, from 0 to college, if you go to school, college, and then from your working years to right up to 65, you had parents, you had supervisors, coaches, teachers, advisors, accountants, lawyers, all telling you what to do. You get to 65 years old, guess what? No book for you. I mean, basically, you're making it up as you go along. And as a result, a lot of us are kind of, shall we say, wavering on what to do. And the great wealth transfer is one of those decisions and discussions we have to have, but there really is no guidance.
All right, let's go with the wonderful woman in white in front who's been patient.
Hi, thanks for the discussion. I want to pick up on the advice theme. You mentioned that you've done a lot of research in that regard and tied together some of the strands from other sessions.
You're right in the middle. You're an integrator.
That's what I do. I'd love to hear your thinking about the potential for AI as a co-pilot. I'm intentionally calling it
not that that's a branded name already, but okay.
I'm going to just, there's no trademark there. I'm intentionally using that word because I'm not about replacing the human. No. I think the human, and you've talked all today about how emotional money is. That doesn't necessarily translate very well to an app. But I'm also responding to the last question about how do we provide the guidance to folks who don't necessarily have enough assets to work with a formal or traditional wealth advisor. Do you see potential there? Are there elements of the longevity planning that would lend themselves to that? And are there pieces that just won't ever lend themselves to that kind of technology?
I love, first of all, the way that you formulated this question, because I too believe that it's not, is it human or is it AI? It's human who has AI to help, who would be most effective in helping clients. To that end, I think AI could be really, really helpful in that it's access and learnings from a lot of experiences of many different people with many different situations and many different financial advisors. And so when a financial advisor has that conversation around longevity, around topics such as family business, around specific financial situation, wouldn't it be amazing to say, gosh, we're a firm with very many smart advisors having these in-depth conversations with other clients. What works? What doesn't? What hits a nerve to ask more questions and uncover more? To your point on, it's really the combination of information and EQ, right? And so that's how I think AI, among other uses, will be really, really great in helping with that deeper discussion that lead to greater wellness for families.
You know, we're living in a time now where AI is the answer. Now, what's your question? I would suggest, and I'm not sure how many people would disagree with this. I hope not many. Is that you're never going to take the human out of the element, and so I'm going to say AI should be what I call augmented intelligence. So the challenge is going to be not getting the answer, but trying to navigate what is the correct question, because even the AIs that are out there now, it's all about the power of the prompt rather than what the AI comes out with. But also, what does it mean? That's interpretation that for now is largely a human thing. And I guess the last thing, and the AI will help it make things more affordable. Sadly, for the near future, I see personal as the new premium. And so you're going to have an app if you can't afford the personal.
Makes sense. All right. As long as we promise to keep the answers a little short, we have time for one question, more question. I know that there was
academic.
I know. All right, one more question. Who has a burning question? All right, in the back there.
Hi, I'm Stacey Tanner. I live here, and I do practice tax law forever. And I seem to be having a lot of clients now who want to cut the generations out, their kids out totally, and they do not want to discuss it with them. And they just think after they pay for college, after they paid for a house, that's enough, and they should be on their own. So could you address how you have had those conversations?
Thank you. That's a great question. All right, quick, guys, quick.
So quickly, yes, see the generation skip as major part of the trends. That is absolutely happening. I don't think avoidance is a way to address it. Discussion and transparency and sharing the reason why is the way to address it. And again, that's the difference between like a lifetime of hurt and maybe I don't love it, but I understand and I love you.
Many small discussions. Keep it small bits. Yep, bits, not not breakfast.
It's not breakfast. I don't know, though. I can sometimes relate to parents, I think, in this case where, these conversations can be really emotional. They can be frustrating. And, no, you don't want to bring it up at the Thanksgiving dinner, but I don't know. Do I want to deal with this at all? I've been so supportive. My kids, when you do have these really fraught situations, is there a way to maybe do this bit by bit to make it less fraught?
Yeah, I think that's the only way that we can do. And that's where, if you have the privilege of having an advisor, that might be able to do. I think your example of bringing the kids in to the conversation, even in their teen years, I think it starts to socialize them that this is a process that we're going to do this with.
Makes sense. Well, very cool. Well, this has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you very much for all of the audience participation. Thank you very much. Let's give Lena and Joe a big round of applause. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much.